Today, we are going to play a fun and appropriate game of 20 questions.
You're Locked On Flames, your daily podcast on the Calgary Flames. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Locked On Flames. As always, I'm your host, Jess Belmosto, and thank you so much for joining me here today. And back with me is my partner in crime, Nick Zararis. Nick, how are you doing today?
The weather is beautiful. We're getting there. This weekend starts the best run of the sports calendar. It's a good time to be alive.
Yes, and FanDuel will have you covered for all of your playoff needs. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. So, because we're at the end of the season, now it's time to start unpacking and looking further down the pipeline. And you have set that up perfectly for us here today. And we're going to talk all about the present, the future, and everything else in between. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On Flames wherever you get your podcasts, as well as YouTube. And you can find us Monday through Friday, 5 days a week, your team every day. Well, where would you like to begin?
What did you learn about the Flames this year?
They're not particularly good, but they have great vibes.
And you mean in terms of just like the feeling amongst the team, not the, the performance, Okay. What do you still... Oh, go ahead.
Like, I feel like last year was just so heavy and miserable that it wasn't possible to really have any lifted spirits, but, guys seem to come to the rink and actually enjoy being around each other.
I would agree with you. They've definitely got the foundational principles right. I would say they probably don't have the actual foundation of a good team, but they have the principles, the culture, the attitude of what will eventually be a good team. So I would agree with you in that respect. The next question. What do you still need to know about the Flames?
I think my biggest question right now is Dustin Wolf. Okay. I think that's, he's projected and expected to be your next starting goaltender, and you need to really work on acclimating him into the system and into the organization. And the defense in front of him isn't particularly good either. So you have to make some adjustments on the back end to set him up for actual success.
I would definitely say Dustin Wolf is one. I would also say we didn't get a lot of clarity on the guys who had some NHL experience already, like Peltier. That wasn't his fault. He got hurt twice. Coronado had a strong season in the AHL. He was over a point per game, but I would have liked to get a better feel for where he was at going into next season, especially because there are going to be a few more spots. And I would agree with you. Dustin Wolf, I would have liked, 20 starts over the course of this season to really kind of get a feel for him, because it's hard to evaluate him right now with the team he's playing behind, because the record is what it is since the trade deadline. That was the point of trading guys.
Exactly.
What would you say was the biggest on ice difference from this team this year versus last year?
Goaltending. I think that's kind of like the obvious answer. I would say Jacob Markstrom actually playing at league average and sometimes better goaltending has really kept the Flames from drowning this season.
I would definitely agree with you there. Goaltending has a magical eraser property of solving all of your problems. It can give you false confidence. There are plenty of organizations around the league that have misinterpreted great goaltending as good defense. There's that old adage about goals against being the only measure of defense that general managers understand. And it's gotten a lot of defensemen paid, and it's also been the reason a lot of teams' windows have closed faster than they expected. I would agree with you there, and I would say I don't think they're as good as I thought they were, as good as I thought they could be in terms of creating offense, because that was the main reason of changing coaches. You thought you would be willing to trade a little bit of defense for some more offense, and they got worse defensively and they created less offense. So I think that's the biggest difference for me, is that the lack of jump in offensive, not even like goal scoring, just like chance creation, did come with conceding more defensively. And then once you started selling guys off, then it became a whole lot harder to evaluate that as well, because some of these guys never played with each other before. Their roles, and distilling out results from the individual player versus the group becomes a lot more complicated when the group at large isn't playing particularly well.
Completely agree.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how far along do you feel like the Flames are in this process? I would say like a 3.
Yeah, I was going to say like a 4, just because of how the trade deadline went. Had they ended up extending Hanifin or Lindholm, we would be at 1.
I completely agree with you. Speaking of the trade deadline, which player that the Flames traded do you think they will miss the most in the long term? That someone, if they came to an agreement with for a long-term contract, who would have been here for 7 or 8 more seasons, which one do you think they will miss the most?
I feel like I don't think Chris Tanev would have gotten that obviously that long term of a deal, but I do feel like he's going to be sorely missed, just because of the style of hockey he plays and how things look without him.
See, it's interesting because your knee-jerk reaction would be to say Lindholm or Hanifin, because the roles they play, they're younger, how much longer they're going to have. Like you said, Tanev, he could play 5 more years. He could retire at the end of this season, and nothing would be all of that surprising. He's got a lot of miles. He's got a really dinged-up track record of being injured for long periods of time, serious injuries. So there's no way to know. I think the argument has to be Hanifin, just because he's the best of the 3 players, just in terms of raw talent, and he's going to probably play pretty well throughout the duration of that contract. It's just that it wouldn't have made sense for the Flames to do that based on where they were at and where he was at. Like, if he wanted to stay and be the highest paid player on a bad team like Zach Werenski is in Columbus, that would have been exactly what it was. Overpaying a guy to stay in a less than great environment because you need to have some guys on your team. When you're a small market team, I understand that principle. Columbus did it with Zach Werenski. Buffalo did it with Jeff Skinner. I would argue the Devils did it with Dougie Hamilton, where you need to overpay a name brand player so that way other star players will say, okay, they did enough to keep him there. So that means if I go there, they will take care of me too. I do think that matters. And I do think the Flames may run into a situation where they have to do that in the next year or two as part of that ramping up process. We've diagnosed them at about 3 or 2 in the process of 1 to 10 of being prepared. Somewhere along the lines of that is going to be getting a star player in here, and they're probably going to have to overpay to do it just based on the nature of their organization, their finances, and how hard it is to get star players. Yeah,
and I mean, we're going to see the cap increase allegedly over these next few seasons too, so hopefully it doesn't feel as bad as some other contracts.
Last question for the opening segment. Which trade was the best?
Lindholm.
I agree with you.
I really, and I understand, like, it's only been a few games. Elias Lindholm has not played a lot in Vancouver because he's dealing with some sort of injury and trying to work on that. But when he has played, you haven't seen a lot of production. Kuzmenko, yes, it's only been however many games, but he has become an impactful player on this team. And it's not about, I don't want to say it's not about winning, because that's not true, but he is there to do his job, and he's fine with where things are and where he's at.
Completely agreed with you. The return, very solid. Of the prospects they've gotten back, Brewsterwich is probably the one I've read the most about that I feel the most confident will eventually be something. Miramonov kind of falls into a different box because he was in the KHL for so long. And like, I know the initial report, like verbiage of the reports were prospect Daniil Miramonov, even though he's 26 and you're not a prospect at 26. But I think Miramonov has the potential to be a pretty impactful player pretty soon. It's just a matter of, like all of these guys, can they reach their potential?
Yeah. And just getting adjusted because, well, here we are. It's the end of the season. And hopefully as we spring forward, they'll be able to really get acclimated and the chemistry will be there when the season rolls around in October. But coming up next, we will dive more into the future and examine our thoughts on that. But before that, we are going to take a quick break. And I want to tell you all about FanDuel. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150, win or lose. Nick, do you find yourself betting on the playoffs?
Betting on playoff hockey is a great way to really incentivize your excitement. Playoff hockey is very exciting to begin with. My word of advice would be bet on something you will have fun betting on. Do not bet on an individual team. Bet on the over, bet on the under, bet on something that is straightforward and won't have you punching air. It's already stressful enough.
Yeah, and if it's a team that you don't have emotional interest in, even better. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Thanks, everyone, for hanging out with us today on Locked On Flames. Make sure you're subscribed wherever you get your podcasts, as well as YouTube. The future.
Who's the next player to get traded?
Jacob Markstrom.
Okay, that's interesting. I feel like it's either Markstrom or it's Mangiapane. I feel like those are the two. I feel like Mangiapane to the right team will get the Flames a pretty nice return, being that I feel like in the right landing spot, he can flirt with 25 goals. He can kill penalties. He can play on your second power play. He plays that style that general managers and coaches love, where you could play him on your third line if you're a deep team, or he could play on your first line if you really need that skill set. And there just aren't a lot of guys who are that versatile, who are genuinely good at everything, and not in a way that some teams will force guys into that role where they're defensively responsible and then they'll get played further up the lineup without the offensive instincts. Mangiapane has those offensive instincts to kind of be a little bit better than he's been the last 2 seasons.
Yeah, it's just about dusting those off again and really letting the floodgates open. I do think Markstrom, simply because I feel like the writing was on the wall this season, and then I feel like the relationship was potentially tarnished.
Yeah, it's difficult to know. Yeah. We only know what we know because people want us to know what we know. So hearing that Jacob Markstrom is disgruntled about this situation could very well be coming from the Devils or the Kings, a team that needs to trade for a goalie, as opposed to someone directly involved in that situation that is trying to drive a wedge between Jacob Markstrom and the Flames. So when it comes to stuff like that, I generally take it at arm's length and don't put a whole lot of stock into it. But I wouldn't be surprised if they trade both of them this summer. Yeah. I think there's a real argument they continue this teardown and continue this process of really turning over the roster, increasing their financial flexibility, increasing their liquidity in terms of draft picks and cap space, and really giving Conroy the ability to do whatever he wants. You know, the more malleable the roster is, ultimately, the better the rebuilding process is going to go.
Yes, 100%.
What position do you think is the Flames' biggest hole?
Defense.
Interesting. Okay, continue.
It's probably the recency bias, and how I have to watch them through my fingers like it's a horror movie, but sometimes it just does not feel. They just don't have what we're used to seeing. I feel like. Then you could also argue center depth too, because that is something that has, I would say, for at least the last 5 years, they've been kind of lacking. They didn't really predict Sean Monahan's injuries and the significant impact it would obviously have on him, and then trade him away. And Elias Lindholm, I don't think was truly meant to be your 1C.
I agree with you. I think it's center just because I feel like you have to have that franchise number one center more than you need that elite number one defenseman. That's not to say you can't win with a defenseman as your best player. It does happen from time to time. You could argue Vegas last year, Pietrangelo, you could argue is their best player. The first time Tampa won the cup, you maybe could have argued Hedman was their best player, though I probably would have taken Kucherov. The Blues, Pietrangelo was definitely their best player in 2019. You know, it's doable, but I think the way I would conduct this thought exercise in my head would be, which would be more beneficial? Somebody along the lines of like a Ryan O'Reilly, or someone along the lines of like, I'm trying to think of like that second tier of good defensemen. That's not great. That's not all world. Somebody like, I was going to say Devon Toews, but he's too good. Somebody a tier below that, you know, like Hampus Lindholm. Let's say Hampus Lindholm, a healthy Hampus Lindholm, you know, which would help the Flames more right now? Hampus Lindholm or Ryan O'Reilly?
Ryan O'Reilly.
That's why I think it's center. That's why I would argue it's center.
Yeah, when you put it that way, that definitely makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, it's a good way to conduct your thought exercises as far as depth. What's the worst thing that could happen to the Flames going forward?
Oh, I don't know. I haven't really thought of that. Well, I mean, they fire Ryan Huska. I have no idea.
Okay.
I mean, I don't. There are so many possibilities. But I don't want to go down a horrible path. So I'm just gonna say Huska simply because, like, he has had a way of working with this group and making them effective. And I feel like removing him from the situation, at least in the foreseeable future, may not be the best idea. But also, I don't know. Mackenzie Weegar breaks his leg. I don't know.
Okay, you're thinking more immediate. The way I was thinking about this was like, they try and speed this up. You know, they trade for a guy who's like 2 years away from unrestricted free agency, trying to speed this process up because they're tired of stinking. You know, this probably isn't for another year or two. This maybe is the deadline 2 years from now, where maybe they're like 5 to 8 points back of the last spot in the West, and they feel like with a little bit of luck going their way, they can make the playoffs and make a step towards climbing out of the abyss, but not really keeping in mind the long-term impact of trading futures when you're still not really ready to be competitive. In my mind, that's kind of the worst case scenario.
Yeah, that makes a lot more sense.
Okay. This one is not... Okay, we'll do this one now. What is your confidence in Conroy's ability to execute a plan? Not that you will agree with it, not that you like it, or that he will do a good job. That he has the plan, he's going to execute it, and he's going to stick with it.
A 6? I feel like I don't want to give him no credit, but I also don't want to give him too much credit. I think that things have started off great in terms of trading those pending UFAs, and he's sounds committed to actually doing this, but I haven't seen enough yet.
I agree with you. I think the longer they stink, I think the more you will start to see. I don't want to say the tide turn, but you will start to see conjecture about this taking too long, that ownership is unhappy, and that'll ultimately be what determines this. Rebuilding is a political act as much as it is as a hockey act. If you can't keep all your constituents bought in on that process, they fire you and they have someone else come in because they fire Conroy tomorrow, they can find 5 to 10 general managers who will all say, I can get them back to the playoffs next year. All you got to do is give me the keys. A lot of lying going on in these interviews.
Yeah. And we don't need to inject any more false hope into the players, the organization, or their fan base. But we're going to wrap up the show with some more questions, and we will be right back right after this. We are at the tail end of the season, and the Flames aren't in the playoff picture. But that's fine, because I want to remind you that you can win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports, and especially daily fantasy hockey. Because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. All you have to do is pick whether studs like McDavid or Crosby or McKinnon will record more or less than their Sleeper projections for things like goals, assists, saves, plus minus, and more in a given game. To win 100 times your bet on Sleeper, you need to correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats. You heard me, Flames fans. You can win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. So start paying attention and nail your picks so you can start winning big. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. Thank you everyone for hanging out with us today. Make sure you're following us on Twitter at Jess Belmosto and at Nick Zararis. Alrighty. Where do you want to start to wrap this up?
Okay. What team in the NHL are you most jealous of right now?
Vegas. Simply because they can win. They have won. They have a general manager that's not afraid to use the rules that are in his favor to get things done.
I will say Vegas is a good answer because their ownership and their general manager are in perfect alignment. The surgery they're going to do on their roster this offseason is going to be fascinating. Marcia Show is a pending unrestricted free agent, and they gave Hannafin that long extension, and they traded for Tomas Hertl. So you don't know if they're going to be able to make the math work on all of this. More likely than not, Marcia so goes. My answer, very straightforward, Dallas. They're the best drafting team in the NHL. If you consistently hit on second and third round picks and turn those guys into impact guys, like, Wyatt Johnston, I think, had the most points of any sophomore in the league this year. When you can find guys like that in the second and third round, Robertson, Hintz, Thomas Harley, it really makes the other parts easier of your team, and this is a team that doesn't have a ton of flexibility. They get Ben and Sagan's contracts out of there in another year or two, and they have a lot more money to play around with where they could go even further with this group because all those guys are still relatively inexpensive because they're so early on in their careers.
Yeah, that's an easy answer.
What teams impressed you the most this season?
I am going to say Boston simply because this was supposed to be a transition year for them without Bergeron and Krejci. They had a very sad story in the way that their playoffs ended last year after a historic season. But I feel like, for the most part, they've done a really good job, and we'll probably be getting some money from me on Saturday. So good job.
What team is going to get the last spot in the Eastern Conference between Washington, Detroit, Philadelphia, and Pittsburgh? Washington and Detroit are tied. They both have one game remaining. The Flyers and the Penguins both would need the Red Wings and Washington to lose. and they would need to win on regulation wins. So who do you think is most likely to get that last spot?
I think Detroit, because they're playing on the second half of a back-to-back tonight. Last night's game was...
I was watching it at the Ranger game on my phone, where me and my friend were watching the Rangers looking up and down. Chaos.
Yeah, it was electric, and I feel like that's the momentum that, like, all they needed to catapult themselves to the playoffs.
It's do or die. They lose, they're eliminated tonight. So very much looking forward to it. Who is your Stanley Cup favorite going into the playoffs?
Our good old friend down in Florida, Matthew Tkachuk and Sam Bennett.
I can
Florida
see
Panthers.
it.
I mean,
Florida was the best team in the East for 75% of the regular season. They had a rough stretch early April, late March, where they went like 3-7-0 in over a 10-game span, but they're rounding into form. You know they're a pain in the butt to play against. You know that every single series, they're going to start out with Toronto 99.9%. Every single series they play, they're probably going to be the more physical team. And other than Tampa Bay, they'll be the most experienced team that they're going to come across. So Florida's a great pick.
Yeah.
Over under 5.5 seasons before the Flames can make a Western Conference final.
Over.
Okay. I would agree with you. Over. I mean, they haven't been to a conference final since 2004. You know, it's been a while.
It's been a bit. Yeah, no, I'm just going to take the over on this to play it safe, but also because not only am I taking the Flames into consideration, you have to look at the other talent in the West, and Edmonton and Dallas, potentially the Avalanche still, like wherever they're at. I feel like that's, you're going up against very stiff competition.
Over under 84.5 standings points for the Flames next season.
I know they said never take the under, so, but I don't know. No, I'm going to take the under on this.
Yes, under would be the safe pick. They're going to finish something in the ballpark of either 79 or 81 this year, and that was with the points they accumulated with guys before they traded. So under 84.5, very safe bet. Who starts opening night next season between the pipes?
If Jacob Markstrom's still here, then I'm going to say Jacob Markstrom.
Yes.
Just because it's the rite of passage. He's your starter. You have to do that.
Yes, for sure. If Markstrom's here, he's the starter. If he's not,
it
could be Dustin Wolf. It could be another goalie. The Flames very well could get on the goalie carousel because you probably don't want to go into next year with Wolf, who has less than 20 career starts, as your workhorse goalie. I feel like you're setting the kid up for a really difficult workload to be your first significant NHL experience, to be on a team that's probably going to be one of the 5 or 6 worst teams in the entire league. That just feels like a really bad formula to set the kid up on. Which Flames prospect are you most excited to see next season?
Oh, I would probably say, Pelletier is the obvious answer, but I think that Jamie Poirier is another one that is ready to potentially make the jump, especially just with where the organization's at and the openings, as well as, he did miss a lot of the season this year due to an injury, but he's bounced back pretty well. So I think he's a good pick.
Yeah, he's a good answer. Sam Honzek maybe cracks the lineup. He's been around the Wranglers, but he came from junior injured, so he hasn't really gotten a chance to play yet. He'll probably have a chance to make the team. Coronado, more likely than not, will outright make the team next year. Maybe Hunter Brustowicz can make the team next year. There's a lot of guys. Last question. This is a silly one. What will the title sponsor of the new arena be?
Oh gosh. Skip the Dishes. Skip the Dishes Arena.
Skip the Dishes. The Saddle Dome presented by Skip the Dishes. I could see that. Something along those lines. I'm gonna guess one of the sports books. I don't know which one, but one of the sports book. What is it in? It's either Bet365 or Sports
Betway or something.
There's
I think
Betway. There's another one too. The one that what's his face from Breaking Bad is in the commercials for. This is terrible radio, but yeah, I digress. I think it'll be one of the gambling. Book. It'll be a sports book more likely than not.
Yeah. So we will revisit this when they finally have a stadium or an arena naming right situation. But thanks everyone for hanging out with us today. I hope you had a lot of fun, and I would love to hear your answers to some of your favorite questions in the comments on YouTube. And you can find us on YouTube as well as wherever you get your podcasts, and follow us on Twitter at Jess Belmosto and at Nick Zararis. And we will, Nick, do you want to share with the rest of the class your news?
Oh yeah. I got sent to another class for a few weeks. I'm going to be hosting Locked On Oilers for as long as the Oilers are alive in the playoffs. So if you're sick of me, root for the Oilers to go far. If you would like me to come back, root for the Kings in round 1. Other than that, I'll be back in a few weeks or at the end of June, one way or the other. I'll be back eventually.
Well, we hope it's before June. So, well, have fun. I hope it's an early exit. For the sake of Calgary fans.
Real hater hours, I understand.
Yeah, I gotta do it. Sorry. But I'll be back tomorrow, and we'll be diving into the last regular season game on Thursday. So have a great night, everyone, and I'll see you tomorrow.